Sweet. Great, thanks for being here. So yeah, hopefully y'all have had time to look over that a little bit. I will be walking through this some, but then also trying to highlight some of the, like, how do you build out a residency plan? What is it? What do you functionally, practically do with guys? Give a little bit of like how we've changed, shifted, developed some over time, and all that. Before I go into all of this though, I do want to just give a really quick piece of exhortation, if you will, about why having something like this is really important. Probably about 5 or 6 years ago, we were not baptizing anywhere near the amount of people that I thought we should be baptizing, based off of the ministries that we were doing, the types of preaching that we had, the just different people that we were interacting with. It just felt like there's just not enough like salvation happening for what we're actually doing. Like, we're making a big impact. We can see it. All of our systems, our processes, they're all like really clean. They're good. Like, we should be seeing more people come to faith, and we're not. What is it? And we're just spending some time just praying, fasting, just asking the Lord, like, Lord, what would you, like, what's going on here, you know? And I feel like the Lord really clearly said to me, hey, like, what would you do if I like brought you 100 people to come to faith? Like, what would you actually do with them? And how would you disciple them? How could you disciple 100 people if they all came to faith today? Like, you wouldn't be able to. You don't have the systems. You don't have you're kind of built for like where you're at right now. You're not built for what I could do amongst you. And I was like, oh, that's really interesting. And so we created this like new believers class. We created some like discipleship stuff, individual stuff, some corporate stuff. And then that next year, we saw like 4 times the amount of conversions that we had seen the previous year without changing anything else. We just literally planned a little bit, you know? And so opposite of like the megachurch strategy, like if you build it, they will come. That's not what I'm saying here. But I am kind of saying if you build it, it might come, you know? And so I think within church planting, like, a lot of us will have the temptation to wait till we get the guy, to wait till we have like the funds, to wait. And I want to be like, no, build this. We built 80% of what you'll see before we had our very first church plant resident. The 20% that we did not build, we built afterwards when we realized we just had some shortcomings. Like, oh, we missed this. Let's add this in now, right? And so I just think it's really important to plan, to prep, to have something. So it doesn't have to be this. This can be like a Kickstarter of your mind of like what's important and stuff like that. But have something, like plan for something so that if the Lord blesses you with 3 people tomorrow, you're able to go because it's already there, right? It's already in your mind. Another thought that also I know we've talked about in here, but I just really want to emphasize, structurally, functionally, practically, Hill Country language, have some structure and some plans. Spiritually, also, I would say though, like have some plans. And so make sure your elders are like praying for this regularly. Tell your elders to fast for this regularly. Tell your congregation to fast for this regularly. Because if we believe that church planting is the main way to redeem the world for Christ, then why in the world would you not call your people to fast for that? Like, just straight up, you know, if we believe it. Now, if you believe that something else is the main way to win the world to Jesus, then tell them to fast for that. But like, let's actually make some disciples that like believe in this a little bit, you know? And so I think like the amount of fruit that we have seen really does correlate with the amount of preparation that we've put into actually trying to get this type of stuff down, a residency plan, both functionally, this paper in front of you, and spiritually though, like all the prayer, and sometimes we're praying for a really long time, you know? Sometimes we're actually really like fasting and praying. And so last year when we were winding down with Travis and really kind of like, okay, Lord, like what's next? We just started fasting and praying for 2 planters by a certain date. And I had multiple people on our team, our elders fast for it. And the Lord gave us that, 2 planters by that date that we had asked for. And then I was like, hey, I think we have some more capacity. What if we just asked for at least 1 more? And then what do you know? The Lord gave us another one. And we have 2 interviews this and next week with 2 other potential guys. And it's like the Lord just is responding to those prayers, you know. I know that prayer is not a magic bullet like that. I also know that without prayer, nothing will happen. And so while I don't want to be like, oh, you're not getting it because you're not praying, I'm not saying that at all. We know that. But if you're not praying, perhaps that's why you're not getting it. Like, I will be that like direct in that, you know, because it's like, it just really matters. Like the spiritual side of this, like really matters, because in prayer, the Lord starts speaking to you certain things where it's like, hey, write out this plan, you know, or hey, like ask this person this, or go talk to this person, or preach on this, or you need to, whatever it might be. And all of those things is God directing us to the people that this plan really serves, you know. So before we're going into building out a residency plan, I just want to hit those two really important things that I feel like have been the most significant for our church. And then I would just really encourage us as an association to just apply that like across the board, you know, not just with church planning residencies, but with our elders and with our key leaders and with all the stuff. Like, fast more. Like, we should be fasting more, pray like more, like spend more time before the Lord, like really praying and asking, plan more, and like trust that the Lord will meet that, and just ask the Lord in the midst of all that. Okay. Last thing real quick before I get into this functional thing, and I'm going to kind of go through this somewhat quickly and kind of fire hosey because I want to do a bunch of Q&A on the back end. But really make sure before you have a good residency plan that you have a lot of clarity of vision before your people. Your people really serve this plan in a lot of different ways. We just did a while ago, we did we brought a consultant in for capital campaign funding, stuff like that. We're kind of thinking like, should we begin to think through this? We'll never be able to afford a building, so whatever, we are where we are. That was literally their feedback. They were like, you have a great church, you'll never have a land, but whatever. But you know, and part of the process, what they do is they bring your top 50 givers in, and then they interview all of them, and it's a one-on-one interview, and they ask all these questions. 49 of the 50 people could say our mission and our vision verbatim, like spot on. The one person who missed it, what they missed was not, they said it. They just said it incorrectly. Our vision, our mission is different. Our vision is that we want to plant 100 churches internationally and 100 churches nationally in the first 50 years of our existence. The reason the person missed it is because they said that we wanted to plant 200 churches internationally and nationally within the first, I don't know what the number is, 100 years, they said. So they literally had it. They just didn't have the right actual numbers, right? And so we say that all the time. Like, in fact, we actually have just transitioned to literally saying it every single Sunday. So now during our hosting moment, we say our mission as a church is to make much of Jesus by reproducing disciples who impact the world for the glory of God. People can spout that, which is a long sentence, right? And our vision is to see 100 churches nationally or internationally in the first 50 years. And like everybody said it, when you go to buy-in, everybody was bought in. When they talk about what compels them to give, all of it was surrounding like mission and vision. We just talk about it like all the time, you know? Y'all seen the well, been to the well, people like Travis, Josh Juhan, others. It's not annoying. It's not like we're over the top. It's not like we're doing weird stuff. It's not like this turns into the gospel. If you were to ask what we talk about most, it would be Jesus, you know. All the scriptures point to Jesus. I deeply believe that. So Christ ends every sermon. It's high gospel, saturated culture. So it's not like this is like this like, that's all we're talking about, right? But there is a lot of clarity, like before our people, which then when you begin to execute plans like this, because it actually does cost your church a lot, the people are already bought in. And it doesn't feel like there's this huge cost. I'll even go through some of these sub-documents in here today where it's like, man, like there's actually a lot of like encouragement as we like start thinking about sending. So for example, this Sunday, we do Giving Sunday once a year where we give it's essentially our end of the year campaign. But because we want to raise up minority residents, minorities have a harder time raising support. And so in order to break that barrier, we just give directly into that. And so I'm going to talk about our minority residency that we have, which is a ministry residency. It precedes this church planting residency, where we will fund minorities and women more than we will fund other people because they just can't raise support statistically as much. So we'll give some vision to it. We'll talk about it. We'll walk through it. Everybody's already bought in. We know we're a sending church, so it's like yes and amen, And when we give, we're giving 25% to that fund, and then we give 20% to church planting, nationally and internationally. We already give 20% to church planting of our actual budget, and so I would love to take 20% of our budget back, right? Like that would be more staff, that would be more. People are giving because we say that. So when we tell people, hey, you should really give, in fact, I think tithing is a benchmark. I think you should shoot above it like the well does. We give 20% of everything that comes in before we even look at it. It never hits our budget like that. That's why we're able to send the way we are. That's why we're able to, it compels people to actually, one, give more, but two, be on visions like this that we're going to talk about that make it really easy for the planter. I'm giving all this background because if you have this plan, but the church isn't behind it, then the planter is going to be kicking against the goads. You have to have your people behind this as well. And so we'll talk about it this Sunday. And then we're going to end in some prayer. And the three things I want to pray for, because it's giving, is that that the Lord would bless us with multiple widow's mite type givers who just really encourage our church, who actually give more than everybody, even though they're only given $10, a few, I forgot the language I'm using, but just givers who are absurd, almost I'm talking about the Macedonians, 2 Corinthians 8, where Paul's they surprised us. They gave out of their poverty. They gave too much, is what Paul was it seemed like Paul was hey, y'all shouldn't be giving like this. And they're no, we want to. So God, would you challenge our faith to have some people where we're hey, don't give like this. And they're no, God is calling me to. And we're okay, we want a few people like that. And then we want some rich people. And we're actually going to pray that God would give us more rich people. And I know it sounds crazy, but what I'm going to say is, the well is a broke church, right? And we are. Comparatively to what our numbers are, we should be 3 times the amount of actual, because we're all young and we're all whatever, okay? Every single one of our churches, though, all of our church planters have taken top tier givers. Josh took our number 1 and 4 best giver. Juhan took our number 2, 5, and 7 top giver. And Travis doesn't even know it, took some of our top givers as well. Even though they're younger, he took a lot of really faithful givers. They've all floated the church plants, all of them. Josh hit COVID, and that number 1 giver is the reason that Refuge is still a church. Juhan hit some troubling stuff. He's in the domain. It's expensive as heck over there. Those givers. So we need rich people so that we can keep planting. So that's what I'm casting. Not so that we can get some building, it's so that it funds all of this stuff that I'm about to talk about. And all the people will get it and they'll all be behind it. So now when the planter comes in, starts asking for money, or we're hey, our people are already there, right? They've been done, heard this. The planter's not doing work that I haven't already done. There's ways to seed vision just over and over. So anyway, before we get into all of this, I just think that those 3 things are really key. You have to have a plan, or else I just don't think God blesses that. You have to have spiritual, fervor behind it. Pray, fast, really ask the Lord into all of this. And then you have to have vision for your people so that this becomes real easy for your planter. And then if they start failing this, then there's probably something on them where they need to slow down the residency, they're not as ready for it, things like that. Okay? Does that make sense? Tracking?
That's good.
Yeah? Sweet. Okay, so for this plan, literally, so just really simply, and like Eric said, we're going to post this so that y'all can have this easily as well. But you already have access to this. There's all these other docs you can play around with too. Make it your own. You do not have to make it the wells. We do certain things that are going to be very different, but we literally walk through with our residents. In fact, I should have pulled up Travis's or Zach's or something right now. Every resident, we try to kind of figure out, okay, here's some things I think we need to grow. This is the template. This is probably 75% built out. After interviews, after some assessments, I usually kind of know this person needs to grow a little bit more in their preaching or in their leadership, vision casting, whatever, right? And so I'll build that into the residency to kind of create more. But I think the way you build it out is start with a template like this. And then just kind of make it yours. Like, what is your church going to be good at? How is God calling you to plant churches? What type of churches is God calling you to plant? You can easily modify it. It doesn't have to be this complex even, I would say, right? There can be some of these seeds in the midst of it. And then just build it out for the planter. So it's like month 1, literally the main goal is just ask a bunch of questions. That's not just a random goal. If they're not avid learners, they're not going to be good planters. And so hidden behind the goal, at the end of the month, if I realize this dude's kind of into himself, this dude ain't really asking questions, this dude's coming into the well and he's like, I know what this should be like, not knowing our people, not knowing what we've been through, they're just kind of into themselves. It's really easy to check that right away and be like, hey bro, if you're not an avid learner, you're gonna crash and burn as a planter, because you gotta be able to shift in with the culture that you're going into, with the things the enemy's gonna throw at you. Like, you have to always be asking questions, you know? And so they're really intentionally built out, is what I'm saying, as we're going through this residency process as a whole. But ask questions, get to know our people. There's just obvious stuff, right? Become a member, blah, blah, whatever. Simple little things like, hey, like, I want you to ask, like this one right here, I want you to ask like a lead pastor question each meeting. In other words, every one-on-one that we have, which sometimes I do weekly, sometimes I do bi-weekly, it just depends on the development. But I want you to ask a question as if you're a lead pastor. Hey, why do you do this? Why are we thinking this? What are you? Serves 2 purposes. 1, avid learner, and I get to see what they're thinking, where they're at. 2, it helps me see what isn't in the residency for them. So Juhan asked a bunch of questions that I added in that Travis didn't have to ask because he asked me. Travis asked a bunch of questions that I added in that is building out stuff for Zach and others, right? And so anyway, like, it just really helps. But then it gets their mind, like, what do they think being a lead pastor is? If all their questions are like hyper theological, you know, then I can very easily be like, nobody in your congregation will ever ask you that question, brother. You're thinking the wrong thoughts, right? Don't nobody care about that. Nobody cares about that. You and Wayne Grudem care about that. Nobody else cares about that, right? So like, ask me more questions like this, okay? And so I get to start to direct them really early on. So what I'm saying here is the way you build it out is just use some intentionality of like, hey, that's partly how I disciple people, right? You might disciple people totally differently. Cool. Take the template and kind of change up some of that and begin to think through, how has God wired you? Because he's probably going to put people that you can develop that I can't in your congregation, in your church, to be able to send. So then just alter it based on how God's wired you and even built you up, right? But anyway, walk through stuff like that, you know. Month 2, it's like, okay, let's start to grow in some competency. Start like the ministry team development process. One thing that I would really encourage, the reason we switched from 1 year to 2 years is, and this might just be true contextually for us, so maybe it's not true for y'all, but we just find a need for a much longer runway. 1, relationally, for the planter to find time to connect with our people, to recruit them to go with him. And then 2, for the planter to actually be able to raise support that will fund the first several, years even, of his church. So what we do, just practically, is we pay our planter a full salary, everything, the first year, 100%. And that's part of what that church planting fund, all the money we're putting in, that's part of what it goes into. The reason being is that the planter, what we say is, the planter is 80% internal. Is that the right number? 20%. 20% external, right? Is that right? And so they're functioning like a staff team member. Travis is meeting with people that I don't want to meet with. You know, or I don't have time for, or Travis is building out our premarital ministry that we needed to reshape because it just wasn't working well, and I'm going to get into how to build out a couple of things. It's really important later, but Travis is acting like a staff member. 20% is external, and that first year, that 20% external is support raising. Hey, raise funds to be able to fund. Year 2 is 100% on Travis, or 100% on Zach or Sage or whoever my planters are, right? And so then year 2, their time flips. And so now they're like 80% external, 20% internal. Their 20% internal is now passing off the things that they built up the people that they built up, the holes that are going to be left because they're taking some of our people. See if they can get people to begin to reproduce themselves. So when you're taking one of my best children's ministry workers, can you help her learn how to replace herself with 2 or 3 people? Because then when she goes into your church plant, guess what she's going to be doing? The exact same thing, right? So now the internal stuff begins to be even training, recruiting for the planter, and even the planter's people. That's how they're guiding it. But then they're in their target area. They're hopefully have moved over there, trying to figure out, how do I lead groups over there? How do I start to build a core team? How do I start to develop and train that core team? All of that is into year 2. So we just find that 2 years is a lot healthier. Within that then, the ministry team development, aka support raising, can start in year 1, and that's what they're doing almost right away. Can you raise some funds? Well, we really encourage our planters, and this is where maybe contextually you won't need to do this, but our planters, their second year is 100% support raised. Their third year or their first year as a church plant, we encourage them to have 75% of their funds external and 25% internal. Reason being is that you don't then hamstring a church the moment you launch it and cause them to have to fund the pastor fully. You let that pastor have way more runway to really build up his church in that way, right? And so 75% is external, 25% internal, but you are beginning to train your people. You should be caring for your pastor. Like, that is something that you should be doing. Year 2 of the church plant is 50-50. Year 3 of the church plant is 25-75. Year 4 of the church plant, the church should be able to fund their lead pastor. And if not, then perhaps there's something wrong. Now, not always. If they're a college church, if they're a church in the inner city, urban, poor area, there are things that could happen that are like, oh, we need to start shifting model, but it gives us 4 years to even start to see that, right? Like, oh, if in 4 years the church is in a place that's very affluent, totally fine, and there's 11 people and they can't fund their pastor, it's like, that might not be the right thing. That might be a church plan. That might be a church planter. We may have all misread. Maybe God just had a totally different plan. That's totally okay. Really interesting, tiny, just sidebar real quick, is all of our planters have raised absurd amounts of money, even for their own context, because nobody raises support like this. I go to Brady, I say, hey bro, would you consider supporting me for 3 years? We're all used to like indefinite support. So then it's like hard. When I'm like, hey, it's just 3 years, Brady will give me more. And he'll be like, oh yeah, totally. And I tell him this plan, what I just said to y'all. And I'm like, hey, and if I don't make it, then it's clear that God didn't want me to do this. And I was like, wrong, Brady is like, oh, I can get behind that. To date, that's how I raise support. We planted 13 years ago. To date, I still have about 50% of my supporters that support other church planters and other people within the Wells ecosystem because they just loved that model. And so when I called them at year 2.5 and I said, hey, y'all can stop giving. We're actually fully self-sufficient now. Thank you. They were like, hey, we don't want to stop giving. Do you have something else? It's how I brought my first staff team member on. I was like, hey, actually, we would love some staff. You can support her, Then a church planter came, and it's continued to cycle, literally, like to date. So tiny little sidebar, but that's just an accidental thing that we fell into. It's really helpful. Anyway, so within this then, y'all, like we're building all of this stuff out. All the books, I change these year by year. In fact, this is an old doc that I sent to y'all. I don't use like 40% of these books anymore because multiple reasons I won't get into today. But there's like all different, things like this. We're really trying to help them learn, like, can you preach? Let's see this. Can you run this huge event? So figure out some event that they're doing that they can actually run. Can you lead like team meetings? How are you with your family? What is your whatever. There's tasky stuff. There's like very practical stuff, very spiritual stuff, I put way too many books on there on purpose. They can't read them all. Travis was like, I will be the first planter to read them all. He read like 60%. Maybe 80%. And anyway, so there's just all this stuff built out. And hopefully y'all have seen the residency. I'm not going to go through all of these this morning, but that you've seen this plan enough. One of the things that I think is really important in building it out is making it yours. Like your churches. Who is God calling you to reach, to plant? What type of people is God calling you to raise up? That should actually dictate and change some of this type of stuff that you're building out. Do you have a lot of really measurable competencies, aptitudes, skills that you're trying to actually develop in the planter? To be very candid, it's always convicting to me because I'm like, dag, I'm asking these planters to be great visionaries, to be high evangelists, to have these shepherding skills. And I haven't even thought about this for myself in a while. So as I'm checking the pastor, in irony, I start to check myself as well. Wow, I don't have a whole lot of entrepreneurial aptitude right now. And I need that. I'm a lead pastor. That's what, like, let's go, right? Oh man, like I haven't even thought about my preaching for a while. I was told it was good, so I just kind of sat in it. What if God wants to multiply this gift? Let me actually begin to with the planter. So it actually begins to create in you as well a little bit of development, you know. On a separate side, and this is something that I need to send to you as well, but Natalie, my wife, also does all sorts of coaching with the church planters' wives. And so she walks through a much more simple, but a very similar plan where, what is it like to be a lead pastor's wife? I find personally that marriage is the biggest accelerant or barrier to planting. That's just what I found. And so if the wife is behind, ready, supporting, on team, let's do this. And team could look very different, right? Team could look like they're just great supporters at the home. Team could look like we're in this together, but there has to be some level of that. So Natalie's checking that the whole time, you know. Our elders are involved with me. They get brought onto the elder board halfway through the residency just to see what it's like to be on the elder board and what we're doing. My exec pastor is helping me. And obviously, if you don't have that, it's totally okay. My children's director is helping me. People like Chandler is helping me. People like our comms person is. So all of our staff team knows that they have to give at least 5% of their time to church planting. So Travis's logo, his design, all of it came from our comms person who was working essentially for Travis for a while to build all this out. Built him out a sweet little thing, and now he has the freshest shirts in the association. His colorway is great. And so it's like, you know, like that's a big piece. Anderson built out a whole kids, what does this look like? How do we pass this on? Whatever, go on and on, right? But all those structural things, like that's how you kind of build it up, which is a lot, right? It takes a lot of work, and there's a lot of intentionality, and there's a lot of sacrifice that needs to go in from the churches, from the elders, from the lead pastor, from the lead pastor's wife, from the congregation at large. Like, it's a lot, right? But what I always say is it's kind of similar to like birthing a child, you know? Some people are like, oh, we're pregnant, whatever. And then they do nothing and they just birth the kid. Okay, and I guess that's fine, right? But hopefully you're like figuring out the hospital stuff and you're buying a crib and a car seat and you're doing a bunch of stuff, right? And you're looking ahead going, hey, what are we gonna need? You're always gonna get caught off guard because something's gonna go wrong at the birth, or your kid's colicky, or they're demon possessed as a 2-year-old and you got to figure out how to get that out, right? It's like something's going to happen where you got to pivot what you thought, but having all this structure and plan doesn't put pressure on it when you then have to pivot that. Or when your church goes through hell, like ours did a couple of years ago, with Travis on board, and we could still send totally fine because there's all this structure for us to even fall back onto. And irony for him to actually pick up and prove he's a pastor. He's not just some dude that wants to preach. He can shepherd the church with me as it's going through chaos. It's helpful then at that moment to be like, hey bro, let's step up and help, you know. Couple of last second things, and then literally I would love to do a ton of Q&A because I'm intentionally leaving things real high level, in part because I've done some of this before, in part because I want to hear what y'all are processing too. But we have a whole job description. What I just said earlier of that timeline, that's what it looks like. Year 1, you're 40 to 55 hours, most of it internal, right? That's what all this is right here, 20 to 30 hours. Really only 4 to 8 in new church stuff. Year 2, it just completely flips. You're only 4 to 8 internal at the well. And so that's what I said in that 80-20 idea. One of the things that's really clear in their JD is that they are taking something significant in your church. What we're really trying to build, and I would really encourage y'all to build something like this. Can they start something? Can they sustain something? Can they grow something? And then can they multiply, send something? Okay. And so, don't just put them in kids ministry because you have like 3 volunteer needs over there. That's not helpful for the planter. That's what your congregation should be doing, right? Begin to have them actually do something that's genuinely significant to like start something. So Juhan started our college ministry. We had 5 college kids. He grew it to like 40. It was really clear this guy can start stuff, you know? So it was really, and it helped us. We hired a whole person to fill his role because he actually benefited our church, literally. So it's like, it's helpful for for y'all's church, right? Can he sustain something? There have been certain pastors that are great starters and great pastor offers, but really bad sustainers, really bad shepherds. It's like, that's really helpful to see, you know? Can they pass off things? So like once they begin to build it up, so like give them significant things to actually do, not just preaching on a Sunday, though that's huge, but we all know that's such a micro fraction of our actual jobs, right? And so it's like, yeah, that's their recruitment. That's what people are going to be like, wow, I like Travis's preaching. I'm going to think about going with him. Totally, we know that. But really, I want to see Travis run the teardown team for 2 years, not just because it was a need, it was, but also it's significant. He's with 60 of our volunteers week in and week out, and he's building them up. And I'm trying to watch him to see, like, is he encouraging them? Is he just kind of, you know, strong-arming them, go tear this down, right? Like, is our team growing? Is it healthy? Is it not? And I can now entrust him too because he's supposed to be a lead pastor, right? So I should be able to fully trust him and not even really think about this for a while he's actually running it, but then we're processing it one-on-one. So this JD is essentially written to give significant things to the church planters, try to have them start something, try to have them sustain or make something better, right? Try to have them pass stuff off. So what in your church right now are you like, man, we really need like this ministry to increase, or we need this whole new ministry. It doesn't have to be college ministry, this huge thing. It could be really simple, like premarital with Travis. We just didn't have enough couples, and we were like, I think we need to turn this more into a class and then do some discipleship afterwards. Can you start this? Can you do this? Or he created a prayer class that we still run today, where it's like, hey, how do you pray really well? Just do a 4-week class on it. He and Becca created it and then taught it together, right? So anyway, there's things like that you're like processing through. That's the JD. A couple other high level things, the competencies, I've shown y'all that before, but we go through all these different like competencies. So spiritual vitality, theological clarity, conviction, marriage and family. And we actually test on every single one of these. So inside of this template at the bottom, you'll see, hey, what are we looking at? We're looking at marriage and family here. We're looking at pastoral leadership. We're looking at entrepreneurial aptitude. That's what all of these things are in here. So all the things that I think is necessary to be a healthy, good lead pastor and church planter are all also integrated into the residency. And certain months are then dictated to focus a little bit more on those things than on other things, okay? And so your competencies, the things you care about, might be a little bit different. Maybe you do want them to be super duper theological and you want them to be asking a bunch of systematic theology questions. Cool, build that in, right? If that's the type of church that you want to plant, that you feel called, dope. Like do that, that's great, right? But that's what we're kind of functioning all this off of. The books and competencies then literally correlate with those things. So spiritual vitality, right, is the first thing up here. One of the things I want to see. So what are some books on holiness? What are some books on spiritual disciplines? What are some books on? And so literally trying to create this whole track for them to be able to really develop so that when Josh plants, he can't be like, we've never talked about this, or I don't know what's going on here, or we done at least thought about it, right? Maybe we didn't train him on it, maybe we didn't, but at least it was in our mind somewhere. And then here's what happens. Literally yesterday, I go to one of our planters and I said, hey, I think you should delay your residency by 6 months. Reason being is that we're just not learning certain things fast enough. And also I can tell the Lord is working on you in these certain ways. It's real easy to literally, as we start to walk through, realize pace isn't being kept. I'm not kind of guessing or feeling. We're all looking at it together. And I'm able to say, hey, like, it's not, I don't think it's him. I don't think that it's a bad thing. I don't think he's not competent. I just think we need a little bit more time with what the Lord's wanting to do in his life, literally. And then we realize there's some church hurt that we never really talked about. And so he's functioning from a place of hurt rather than a place of health. And I'm like, okay, let's reframe some of that. Or if we need to accelerate it, great. Like, it's easy to say, we're kind of crushing this, yo. Like, you're getting through, or some things that I was going to train you on, you already got. We don't need to even talk about that. So now we can begin to say, hey, and you're building all this time with our people. So it really helps if you know what you're looking for to walk through those really quickly. One of the things that we literally have on this is a self-assessment of these things. And so the planters will go and they'll take a self-assessment of spiritual vitality. I know it's small here, but theological clarity, conviction. And they assess it, and I assess it for them. And then we look at it, and we go, wow, they're really, really strong in missional lifestyle, but really bad at their relationships. So let's focus on this. So when Travis and I first took it, entrepreneurial aptitude, right, was the weaker one. And so I graded him lower in that. He graded himself lower in it. Great. Now that part of the residency just got stretched out some. But theological clarity or conviction, we shrunk that part because I'm like, he felt convicted. Part of the reason I hired Travis is because he was like, hey, if you don't hire me, I'm going to plant a church anyway. It'll just be without y'all, I guess, And I was like, oh, this guy feels really called to plant a church, And so it's like, I don't really need to talk about conviction a whole lot. It's there, Maybe some longevity of conviction, endurance in conviction. What happens when the enemy just throws up all over your plans and you get attacked? Do you still have conviction? Sure, let's talk about that. But we can shrink that part, expand the, entrepreneurial part. So anyway, all these things are all, one, you have them built out. Last thing I'll fly through, I have all of these different folders that Eric will have access to. So like I said, the wife development is all right here. Children's ministry plans or different booklets, packets that we have for them. I'm only showing you this page to say there's a lot of thought. There's a lot of intentionality. And I really think the more you have it, I think the more the Lord, you're kind of showing the Lord in yourself, hey, I can handle this. Not like God needs to know that, right? You need to know that. Can you handle it? And can you do what is needed so that the Lord can bless with that? We have external docs that I do think it would be really wise to at least think through. So this is things that we just email to people who are kind of interested. And so we'll walk through what's our mission and vision. How do we multiply? What the heck is a church, right? And so these are just all sorts of here's what our planting is. Even where do we plant churches? What is the residency? Who is it? Here's some of our focus areas. We really are thinking about minority-led churches because there is a different training that is needed for minorities to lead, and we can do it. We want these high gospel-driven churches, would love some diversity team, want to be about reaching the lost. These are just different things where we're we just care about it as the well. Association cares about some stuff. We want you to feel that too. But for us, we're going to plant these type of people. We want to plant in cities, and so we're probably not going to make as good of a rural plant. We're just not even, I don't even talk like that. And so then it's harder for me to train. Now we can probably, but then what will probably happen is the 20% that was missed in my training, being a minority, going into the city, having to learn this stuff of wait, that was something that works in the suburbs. It does not work in the city. I need to totally reframe this. I'm going to do the same thing to the rural guy. I'm going to be hey, you should preach on this. And they don't care about that there, right? And so he's what? So I'm great. This is what we focus on as a church. Anyway, so now when somebody's interested, hey, what do y'all do? It's hey, here's this packet. We send them, this is a one pager, but it's the same thing. We have a 30 pager as well that we can just email to people right away. Some of it has the, this, whatever this is, the template, on it so that they can see, here's some stuff you're learning even, things like that to help recruit. And then once again, y'all, everybody involved, right? And so right now it's like, hey, how do you create your first budget? How do you create your financial systems? How do you create a 501c3? How do you, like, we have all of that for people so that they should be able to just like run and gun. And they're not trying to figure out like, how do I do this really technical thing? And all of this is in like further down, but somewhere in here, in this template, create a 501c3 so you can start raising money. And we just learned this is the right timing. I missed something with Travis. I don't remember what we were late on, but I was like, dang, we should have thought about that. Maybe his website or something, I don't know. We should have thought about that a while ago. So I just slid it up, right? Because it's like, well, that matters more now. And then boom, here's a document attached to it. And then now we're not just shooting in the dark, right? So anyway, I think ultimately how you build a plan is you just do it. And it's like a lot of hard stuff and a lot of hard work to start it. But now, when Zach came on, I looked through this for 25 minutes max and changed a few bullet points and changed some stuff that I thought I saw in him, and then we're good to go. Like, I'm ready to go with him because it's all there. We have all this documentation for him, right? I'm not kind of firing from the hip. Something's probably going to come up, or I'm going to have to add something, change something, but I just think that's really helpful, healthy to be able to do. So anyway, that's kind of been our journey, our process, kind of where we're at with all that. So anything you think I should hit on that I haven't hit on? And then we'd love to do Q&A, obviously.
Yeah, no, the thing that comes to mind I was going to ask you anyway is talk about your time.
Yeah, that's good.
So how much time are you spending week to week, month to month? You touched on, hey, 5% of my staff is kind of, you just know, hey, when the church planner walks in your office, right, 5% of your time, I expect you to help them. But give us a picture of your week to week, month to month, where the blocks are in your calendar that you're leveraging this and time with Travis and Zach and those guys.
That's great. They turn into my direct reports is what I do. And so sometimes I do weekly, sometimes I do bi-weekly. So I spend about an hour there, but then I just put them into the rest of our systems, honestly. So each church planner, I would say, costs me an hour and a half per week when it's all said and done, because they're going to have some random question about something that is going to pull me aside, or we're going to have a longer meeting about this or that. But the reason why it doesn't cost me more is that they're in our elder meetings, and I trust our elders, and we have a good elder process. We have the same documentation with our elder board. So it's really easy for them just to jump in and then just learn from our elders. And then if they have elder questions, I can be like, go talk to David about that or whatever, right? They're in my preaching and teaching class. So I'm not like individually talking about preaching and teaching with them. We're collectively doing it. And then we do what we call WOA each week, wins, opportunities, awareness, every time somebody preaches. Every time I preach, I get feedback from 2 people on our team where they're like, this was great, you totally missed this, or this was confusing, or this was whatever. So our planters are getting that as well. So we already have a meeting where we go through exegetical stuff as a team for the upcoming Sunday. We just spend 10 minutes looking back. So when Travis preaches, I'm one of his WOA feedback persons. So now it's not an extra meeting. We're already in exegesis anyway. So now it's just adding that in. So that's why it only costs me like that amount of time. It's because I use all the other things that the well already has. But Travis is getting exegesis with me on Monday, staff meeting with me on Tuesday, one-on-one time with me on Wednesday, elder meeting on Friday. We're actually getting a good amount of time. It's just not, I'm doing all that stuff anyway, right? So that's what that time looks like.
So when I opened this and read it, man, I was super blown away by the rigor, right? And so a couple of questions. One is, and I'm hearing it, so I assume that to do this way, there has to be like a high degree of expected reciprocation from your staff and lay leaders and cooperation. Mm-hmm. And then the other question, sensitively, and I don't mean this in an HR way, like what was it like to perform against that?
That's really great.
Level of rigor?
You answer that second question first.
It wasn't hard at all. I feel like for me, what was more of like a learning curve, I guess, or a little bit more intimidating was going into a bigger church. But once you really got in and saw the way that it operated and were a part of the staff meetings and everything, I mean, the very first meeting, the very first day I was in there, a young lady pulled me out and was like, hey, we've been praying for you to be here. We know that God has you here for a reason. Like, walk in that, like, all of that. And so from day one, I felt comfortable from the very beginning. Even before I got brought on staff, like, Tory had already been shepherding me. I had lost my pastor and stuff. And so there was already a little bit of, like, a connection there. And so going in, I felt comfortable enough to be transparent through my questions, through my own insecurities or worries, to communicate it. And throughout the process, it actually gave me more confidence and assurance that, like, hey, they know what they're doing, and there's intentionality. They're not just sticking me in kids ministry because it's a need. But, and so it actually gave me more assurance and confidence that I was in a good spot to grow and prepare.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
I'll give you $20 later. Thanks. I think too, to add on to that as well, it does create an expectation that you're going to run if you're here. We run hard as a church, but we also play a ton, and we also seek the Lord like a ton. And so it kind of creates a little bit of like, oh. And so multiple of my church planners have said like, oh, okay, I do got to step up. But then when they learn, okay, but we're not like this like business organization. It's like, when your wife is sick, like, bro, don't come in today. And just because we didn't fill this out, who cares about that thing? Go care for your wife. So then there's like, oh, okay, we shoot really high, but then we care really deeply. But then I would even say, to perhaps even counter that, it's like, okay, maybe your church doesn't run like this. It is not doing the same type of thing. That's where I think the build your own plan comes into, like, hey, do what your church is. If your church is way more chill and relational, and this feels way too structured and organizational, then like make it more relational, Now I will say, I would contend, I think that the Well is one of the most relational churches, period. I actually asked ChatGPT the other day, of all the churches in Greater Austin, who really does community really well? Maybe it's on their, their Google reviews, maybe it's not just stated, who actually does it really, really well. And the Well was in the top 3. Okay, so I'm like, I think we do community really, really well. I think we're really relational. I think we're really, I genuinely believe that. So even though there's all this structure, it doesn't feel that way once you're in it, right? It feels like somebody pulling Travis aside, like, hey, we've been praying for you. It feels like with our last, I got 3 emails after Travis went out. I know we're not supposed to go with Travis, but God's told us that we're supposed to be on a church planting team. So I would love to meet all the new church planters that come in. So Zach and Sage both already have people committed to them before they even came, literally. And people have committed. So they came into a commitment, right? That's dope. But it's because the clarity of vision was already there. So this becomes easy. So that's the first thing I said, right? This now our whole congregation is moving with. So anyway, so there has to be some intentionality, rigor, all that stuff. But I don't think that it's felt like that. I think that it gives a lot of comfort that, like, oh, we know what we're doing. But then once you feel it.
Yeah, it sounds like emotionally and spiritually, he knew that everyone was for him.
Yeah.
Can I push you?
Push.
Can your church planters reproduce this?
That's a phenomenal question. I think yes.
Have they reproduced it?
2 of them cannot. One of them is probably right there. There's another church that I was like really invested. Our church didn't plant, but I was on their like elder board or advisory board, all this different stuff, who's already put this into play. I think that Juhan is the only one that has the size and bandwidth to be able to do this right now. And he's looking at, I just passed off one person. I'm like, I don't think this is the Well. I think that you could. And he just changed some logos, changed some stuff. Because once you have it, it's like there. And so Josh is still a smaller church, and I just don't think that they'll be able to plant there. Travis just launched a couple weeks ago, and so a couple months ago. And so, to be fair, I have not seen it just like clear as day, but Christ Freedom up in Dallas is doing this. Juhan's already starting to process doing this. And I think that now it's just like, honestly, it feels like it's almost like, I don't know how y'all create sermon series, like whole series. Like we're doing 1 Thessalonians next. I don't know what y'all do there. My guess is about the amount of time that it takes you to do all of that. Let's type up where we're going. Let's read the text a few times. Let's begin to yada, yada, yada. I think it takes about that much time to at least get the initial shot at this, which that means that's not that much time. It just takes you some intentionality, right? So now when Juhan just has to sit down for 20 hours to start to build all of this in the way that he wants to, but then that's it. After that 20 hours, then it turns into like a 30-minute adjustment a little bit. And so far they've been able to do it, though not with a literal church planter, so.
Is the model contingent on, or is the system contingent on a specific model? In other words, have you flexed it with somebody who's bivocational, house church model, or are you like, this 2-year residency is built for this kind of church plant?
Yep, that's a great question. So far, the 2-year resident, we've only planted full-time, you know, what we would typically probably most of us in the room think. We haven't done Bivo yet. We're like house church. We wouldn't plant a house church, not because we don't believe in them. I do believe in them. I think they're great. That's just not how the Well's built in that way. Our community groups are essentially house churches, so I think it would feel weird to go from what we're doing into essentially an identical thing, but then we call that a church, and then now these ones aren't. So we just wouldn't plant house churches, probably. I shouldn't say wouldn't, probably wouldn't lean to. Bivo and stuff, we totally would. And then I think what this does is I would probably look like, do I do a 3-year residency and just stretch some of this out because I don't have as much time with the person to really invest, but I still want them to grab the culture and to grab and so I think that that's where, but once again, that's why I'm like, y'all build y'all stuff, because I think once you have some of the template and structure, now it's like, hey, it doesn't matter as much about how to like run a staff team meeting because this person wants to stay Bivo. So he doesn't need staff team time. He doesn't need like, here's all the structures to all this stuff. He doesn't need this. Just strip it out of this, and then it creates a much easier plan. So though we have not done that, I think it's really easily, you know, molded to that.
I have more questions.
Did you do this by yourself, or was this like you and your elders, or what team in putting that document together originally?
Yeah, I started it by myself. But it's for sure been through many hands since then. But honestly, probably 90% is mine still, honestly. But I was stealing stuff though. I took some of what Hill Country did where they didn't have direct structure for me, but they had the idea of structure and just documented it. I took some city of city stuff. I took some stuff where we used to be in 829, stole some of that and like added that in. So I think I just structured a lot of what already was doing anew and then built it from there.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
2 questions. One is less about the process, really the sufficiency of the process against who you recruit into it. It's wonderfully thorough, well thought out, love it, super encouraging. In your opinion or experience, sufficient as a standalone, like as a replacement for a seminary, right? Or as an augment?
Just seminary, or are you speaking more broadly as well?
The question is really intended, hey, we've got a guy who is really wonderful, does not have a Bible college, does not have seminary. This is sufficient to get him from financial planner to pastor.
Yep, I think definitely sufficient.
Great.
Unless there was a, like I said earlier, a higher theological, like, we want them to be able to lay out their whole soteriological view of blah, 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 whatever. So, but I'm just like, the people that we shepherd, they've never asked me about the end times, ever. They've never asked me about, they're just like, hey, what's up with my marriage? Or what's up with this, you know. Yeah. So as long as you can like kind of train that. And irony, our first 2 planters, I dropped out of high school at first, got their GED. And so it's like, and so there was, and then you're in seminary right now, but planted without it. Juhan was very highly seminary trained. Travis had Bible, but no seminary. And I think that all of them are, Josh is probably the most theologically astute one of all of us, of all of our planters, despite not having any of that, because that's just him. So we actually added some stuff in that kind of like, cultivated some of that, because it was like, oh, started talking about things I'd never talked with Travis about, started talking about certain theological things. That was part of our one-on-ones sometimes. So it creates that mold, but I think it's totally sufficient.
Okay. Second question, I'll try and make it as succinct as I can. The tight way of saying it is, do you all have annual patterns? Or is it against like, oh wow, we planted 3 in the last 5 months, and that's really hit giving and attendance. Hey, we need to let well catch back up for a second. So is that health or time-based? Does that make sense?
Health.
Yeah.
Yep, great question. It's all health-based. What we just told our church this past Sunday is, can all of y'all fast and pray this week for the well to grow in size? And then I knew I was talking about giving this week, because we have 3, perhaps 4 church planters on our team. So we're not asking you to fast and pray for us to grow because we want to be the next hot thing in Austin. Don't give a crap about that. We want to send and push back darkness. And so could you fast and pray? Because if all these planters take 50 people, and they all take 50 givers, and they all take 50 volunteers, we hurting, right, where we are today. So before we even get there, would you fast and pray for that? And so it's all health oriented. But then once again, the motivation, even our congregation, our planters are working with them now. They're not working against them, because our whole body is like, oh, okay, dope. Is everybody gonna fast? No. Will 40% of our people fast and pray for that? Heck yeah. And they're probably gonna be more likely to go because of it even, but all health oriented. So if we did what we're doing right now and then did not recoup, we would wait a little bit and try to recoup.
Yeah. Great.
You said you had 40 questions already?
Do you have key metrics for you that would be no-go for your residents?
Yep.
Pertaining to their core team size and their elders, and just talk about that briefly.
Yep. It takes too long to find, but yes, I have a bunch of metrics. A little bit different based on like where are they going to be at, what type of church do they want to plant. So it definitely, just like this, it varies as to where they're at. But we have both minimum and maximum. We also have a maximum. We don't want them to take more than 50 people, not because it would hurt us or anything, but because it just turns them immediately into a church with a bunch of people that want it to look like the well versus want it to look like Refuge. And Refuge is gonna look totally different than the well. So if you get 100 people and they're all like, why ain't our worship like this? Why ain't your preaching like that? It's just gonna create backwards. So we want it to truly be missional. That's our top limit. Our bottom limit, depending on where they're at, is probably like, it just depends on the leaders. We're probably like 15 like adults that are like really solid, because we started with 11, so we know it can happen. It's just a lot harder. The smaller, the harder, right? And then we have certain metrics to like what is healthy for a church as well. And so we want to see them moving towards the health of a church, but it's not like we want them to be 300 people by this date it's just like, no, we just want you to have like leadership development, this, some self-sufficiency, certain things. But it's like Refuge, because of what they're doing, is not even gunning for the same size as like Juhan and what he's doing, and that's great. And so we'll actually have different metrics. So one of the things that's really important, by the way, I didn't say, is the coaching afterwards. That was something that Josh was the guinea pig for everything, but that was something where I was like, okay, we need to have a really good plan for that as well. So I now have a 12-month built out, and that's in the doc that Eric's gonna put up as well. But coaching, so month by month, we're actually thinking through different strategies and stuff like that, and I'm checking all of that as well to try to help them even after they go get to where they need to be. But before we send, there's a bunch of metrics.
Do you require any other elders before you send?
I don't require elders, but they have to have an elder plan ready to go, and if they don't have elders, some sort of advisory board to help them launch. But I don't think that you have to plant with elders. I think it's really helpful. In fact, I think it's helpful if you can plant with another staff team member, personally. But yeah. So Travis doesn't have established elders right now, but he took 4 people who went through our elder process, who we were already looking at to consider as elders. So now he's just waiting to make sure they're fully bought in, they got value culture to establish them. And I would put 3 of the 4 that he took on his board today type thing. So we feel comfortable with that. So he doesn't even have an advisory board in the same way that we would with somebody else. Juhan took an elder off of our elder board and went with him. And then Josh took some really key leaders that we were also, once again, looking at as potential elders and stuff like that. So,
can you speak to, like in our association, our pastor's thinking about doing this, having a resident, going through this kind of residency plan with somebody. You mentioned this a little bit in your answer to Tim's question about praying for growth, but I think what I hear from some of our pastors is like, hey, my church is plateaued or declining, we're struggling to hit our budget, we don't have enough volunteers for our ministries, and I'm supposed to give away 50 people, right? So maybe just, I know I'm kind of asking you off the top of your head, but just speak to that a little bit of like, how do you think through that? How would you encourage a pastor? Like, I know you're battling da-da-da-da-da in your church, but you can still do this.
Oh, Keith, come on, bro. I don't want to take this really light statements here, but I just really believe you can't outgive God, and that's just my personal feeling. And so I'm like, might it hurt because God's trying to do something else in you? 12 million% yes to that, right? And so maybe they do take some people and you don't grow, because that's not what God wants for you. God's doing something completely different in your church. Submit to that then, and trust that He's a good Father who disciplines those He loves, right? But I'm like, every time we've been stuck in something, I mean, this isn't church planting, but it's the exact same thing. We had the worst giving that we had ever had. We had never ever had one singular month in the red since the launch of our church. Now our budget was absurdly conservative the whole time, but nonetheless, we were never ever in the red until last year. We had 3 straight months in the red, and we were still really conservative, but our giving just totally plummeted. And we were like, dang, this kind of sucks. And we had to start making plans to do some staff cuts. And so we started looking at some salary cuts. We started looking at positional cuts, which is just sucky, And then Holland emails everyone and says, hey, we have this need. And our elders prayed for like 11 seconds. And Paul Carlson, who was on the elder board at the time, was like, I feel like the Lord is calling us to give $50K to Holland. And I was like, that's the staff position we just said we were going to cut last week. Like, we just said that. And you're like, we ain't got money sitting around like that. And we ain't rich, y'all. I told you, right? And prayed about it. And I felt really convicted as well. I'm supposed to do this. And prayed, gave. And then the next month was our highest giving ever. And we didn't even talk about any of it, And since then, every single month, we've had the highest giving month ever. Since that date, it's gone up each time. This month, it looks like it's finally going to break that trend. That's because that was a year ago. We must have to give again. Maybe that's but I'm just like, I just have seen that too many times. Now, I don't think it always works like that. We could have gave and then had to cut and because God's doing something different in our church. But I think for the pastor that's struggling to like see the sacrifice of this, I'm like, sacrifice turns you into the person of Christ. And that's what we're supposed to be gunning for, is to be like Jesus. And Jesus is sacrificial. He's sacrificed, right? And you just got to believe that reward is coming, even if it's not on this side. So I would never advise plant to kill your church, right? Like, your church needs to be healthy. We'd love to do it in health and in. But I'm also like, I would sometimes be like, risk it and just see what the Lord does. Like, just see. The Lord tends to respond to that type of faith, y'all. And there tends to be some multiplication of fishes and loaves and of oil for the widow and of whatever the thing might be. It's like, that is the pattern. That's the economy of God and the pattern that we see throughout the scriptures. And we've just felt that as a church. And so I could give multiple stories. That one's a really easy, tangible one. But even of planting, where it's like silly things. Josh took some of my most dear, this is a personal one. It's going to sound silly to some of y'all, but it means a lot to me. Our church has struggled to be diverse because we're in Austin, freaking Texas. Austin, Texas is homogenous and not diverse, and it's real whack. And when you go downtown, it's like, just go into the restaurants. Next time you go to a restaurant downtown, and y'all might not feel it because a lot of y'all in here are white. I feel it every time I walk in. I'm the only minority in that restaurant, and I'm like, dang, Austin is real white, or very Hispanic, Latino, but like Spanish speaking, I don't speak Spanish, I can't even. So there's these two cultures and I'm like, doggone. And so we've really struggled for diversity, but feel called to it, love it, all the stuff. Josh took some fire, like black leaders, and it wasn't a ton. It wasn't like he took like 50 black leaders, you know, but a black couple, like one of the few black couples that we had all these people that were minority married to white women because of me and many others and Josh at the time and many others who were there, right? And so we had a bunch of those, but that doesn't help the minority woman feel welcome. In fact, it is a big deterrent to her because they're like, I'm not good enough. They already struggled with all of that. And now all these leaders all married to all these white women, you know? And so Josh took some of our like fire leaders and that was a genuine like, dang Lord, like why couldn't all my white people went with Josh, you know, like, why did certain people and a couple of, you know, Latino leaders and stuff like that. And right away, I mean, very soon, I shouldn't say right away, very soon afterwards though, the Lord started bringing in these like fire, like black couples and black leaders that like started coming in. And Juhan with giving, same thing. Some of the givers that went with him, it was like, Lord, we're finally able to dream. Because we got like money coming in now. They all went with Juhan, you know? And it's like, okay, well, here we go. The Lord's always replaced it. So I know I'm saying the same thing over and over, but I just really want to encourage like some measure of faith there. It does take faith. It takes a lot of planning, a lot of work. I feel like this is you tilling the ground. And faith is almost like you planting the seed, hoping that it dies in the ground, and then resurrects into fruit 30, 60, 100-fold. And so this is the tilling of the soil, all the structure. You kind of taking some risks sometimes, I feel like is the faith seed. That I kind of sound prosperity gospel right now, but I'm like, I don't know, y'all. It's been proven to me, so yeah.
Just to clarify, prosperity gospel's been proven to you?
A little bit. I need to not reject as much as I did. You can't outgive God's been proven to me.
Tory, in your plan, as I read through it, there's a big component in year one around, I think it's ministry team development, MTD, rhythms.
Yep.
And I feel like I know what that is, but could you unpack that?
Yeah, it's a great question.
Why it's a big part of the development of the planter.
Yeah, sorry for not diving into that. Thank you. Ministry team development is a sexy term for support raising. Okay, makes it feel less cute. All right. So support raising, we use Reliant. So we offload all of our support raising. Okay. So we used to do it internal. You did it internal. Juhan did it internal. The problem is that then like Juhan needed his funds, but we're like, wait a minute. Or like somebody was trying to give to Josh, ended up giving to the general fund, and now we're trying to like figure that. It was just weird for us internal. So now we do everything through Reliant. We have a good partnership with Reliant. It's why we use them. But I would say y'all can use anybody. You can do it internal, but that's something. And we still do it internal. But now we make them get their own 501c3 first, get their own, so that's all tax stuff. So they begin to give to them. That costs them, right? Now they need bookkeeping and stuff like that. So we would take some of these things that are in this doc, and we would move it up higher, become a 501c3 earlier, do this. If you don't want to pay the Reliance like 10% fee or whatever. But that's all that is. And so all the MTD stuff from our end is just goals. It's just like be at 20%. Have a plan that like, Natalie and I support all of our planters or house support in some way, shape, or form. We don't always give monthly, we don't always, but try to do something. So I'm like, pitch me. Like make it like, oh yeah, I would give to this, you know? Or if I'm like, this sucks, then like, great, let's rehash that. So that's what that is.
Tory, I'm curious, when you start to get into the developing the missional core phase, what kind of guidance do you give to the planter and help them like form that team?
Yeah, that's real. Form the team.
Yes.
That's really great.
Which way did you think I was going to?
I thought you were going to say like, what are we like how to develop the missional core team once it's formed.
Yeah, no, the front part.
That's great. How to develop it once it's formed is also in this. Yeah. So there's a whole little, and everybody's done completely different, but it just gives them ideas as to what to do. 20 weeks, walk through 4 different things each week. So that's that part. We have that documented for them because it's what I did with my core team. I'm like, hey, I'll do this. And then everybody's done it different. And I'm like, hey, can you send me what you did? Can you? Just to try to resource, how to form. It's funny. We talk about that often based on like where they're going and stuff like that. What type of church do you want to plant? What are things you want to see in your church? And so, for example, like and y'all probably know this, but the Well is just diverse, not just ethnically, all that stuff, but even like theologically. Like we probably stretch a little bit more into the Reformed charismatic space, as well as being able to sit over here in this much more like almost cessationist view, and like we can stretch into both of those based on who our leaders are, all that stuff. So one of our planters right now is just way more charismatic and just way more like, he just wants to see a church that's more spirit-filled, that has more gifts operating, present, all that stuff. We do as a church. It's just we do, but it's kind of hidden, so you wouldn't fully know. Or it's there, but we're not highlighting, celebrating it, so you're not like, oh, but so he can recruit from within it because we're there. We're enough in there where people aren't scared of name the spiritual gift or whatever, But for him then, it's like really important. It's like, okay, but like if like old school DTS, like almost like cessationist, sort of like wants to, like this is just gonna clash and collide. They feel totally fine at the Well because of how we're preaching the word, because of how we're not highlighting the gifts above something else or whatever, But like, do you want them on your elder board, bro? Like, it's just gonna be frustrating when you're like, hey, we don't need to preach today. Let's just like pray and like listen to the Lord. That person is gonna be like, you're going to hell, and maybe you're not, because they did that in the Bible, right? And so it's like, no, if you want to sit into this, then be careful. So we do more like that type of stuff. But I'm also like, the Lord builds his church. So you just pray, and like, if the Lord wants to bring this person really badly, maybe it's because you about to go too far over there, and this person is going to be your anchor towards health. And so perhaps submit even to the Lord in that. But we're a little bit less thoughtful, honestly, on like the actual recruiting of like physical, literal people.
Yeah. And like, do you give guidance in that to say, hey, you're thinking about this area, I think person A, B, and C could be good for you to go after?
Yes.
Like, do you speak heavily into that, or?
Yes,
okay.
I do. Yeah. To be very candid, I actually learned that mistake with Josh where I didn't speak enough into. I did talk to some people. You should go, or you should pray about this, or you should, but not enough. And so I do it both for the planter. Hey, you should think about this person, and for the person. Hey, ever thought about planting? I just sent an email literally this morning to somebody who I was like, you should think about going with Zach. Just what you're thinking, where you're at, what you're processing. This is the type of church that Zach's want to have. I think that you'd be really good. I didn't do enough of that early on. And so I thought because I was doing it corporately that it mattered. But it's like, no, interpersonally matters too. So both sides I do that more now.
That's helpful.
Going once, going twice.
What did you do the first 3 years of the Well to like help cast vision in a young church or multiplication in church planting?
Come on, ask that question, bro. Yeah. Giving was always what it is right now is what it's always been. So we gave aggressively to planting, though we had no planter. But then when Josh showed up, we had all the money. We didn't have to pray, think, ask. It was already there, So gave, yep.
To that. Was a lot of that like you were putting it aside for church planting,
Yes.
or specifically like we met this church planter and we were helping both? Or
That's a great question. The Well, y'all probably all are different than us, so I would stay different. The Well, we decided early on we're not going to give to something that we're not doing, not because we don't believe in it, but because we really felt like God's called us to plant 100 churches. If we're going to do that, we need a lot of money, a lot of people, a lot. So if Jesse's planting a church, and I love it. I'm like, I love this. We just decided we're not going to financially give to this in case the Lord ever brings 4 planters at the same time. Oh, what do you know? We now have 4 planters at the same time. So now we need all these funds that we could. So we've been generous in other ways, right? But so for us, we kept it. And that way we could use it when we felt called to. Same is true with the nations, which is I know is a different question than today. But all of a sudden, it looks like we're about to have like a lot of people on the field at the same time that we're monthly supporting. We have millions of dollars but it's going to run out real quick if we have 17 on the field at the same time, and we want to send 100 church plants there too. So we've been real purposeful not to give outside of the well. That's just us. Y'all do you. But giving is a part of that. Vision is the biggest piece of that, like showing people, hey, like we don't exist for us, like we exist beyond us, you know. I said this before, but I'm like, you know, Travis, you gave great language. I started using your language actually in the podcast you did. But we always said, be fruitful and multiply is the commission for every family. This is the family of God. Every church is thinking about being fruitful. No church is thinking about multiplying. Everybody wants their church to be healthy. God's commission to the family is be fruitful and multiply. And so how are you multiplying corporately? Like the local church is God's means of redeeming. So we would integrate that into our leadership early, into our congregation early. We've learned, I was 25 when I planted, y'all, so come on now. I was young and dumb, all right? So I've learned, because I've grown up, like in a lot of ways, like how do I be a good leader? How do I, all that stuff, right? But all that we were trying to integrate early on in a church, vision, leadership, all that stuff. And so had this in theory before Josh, built it out with Josh, and then began to execute it. So all the books, all the stuff he was our first. So all that was built out. So structurally, we did it early on. Mission and vision early on, people would be like, hey, we're like 5 years in, we have nothing. It's like, we know, but we just got over the mark where now we can start doing it. We start with 11 people. So we said that a lot. Hey, we start with 11 people. And this is what we would like highlight what God's doing so that it feels like, oh yeah. So there's a bunch, bro. A lot of vision stuff though, I would say, now that I'm talking out loud.
So Tory, you know, I know Travis and Josh are here, but like, even with Juhan, have they launched with that same initial commitment, like 20%?
Mm-mm.
Okay.
Yep, great question. No, I don't hold our planters to the same thing. I do want them to have, obviously, missional heart, certain things. I don't feel like they have to have the same church planting conviction. I would love for all of our churches to plant at least one church, because I think that they'll see like, oh my God, this seeds the church like nothing else we can do, you know. I think from heaven it seeds it, and from the congregation it seeds it, but not the same thing at all. So like Josh doesn't have a church planting plan, nothing right now, but what he's doing, none of us could do. I can't do what they're literally doing in Dove Springs right now. So I'm like, that is just as missional, just as do that. And then hopefully the Lord brings some dude out of Dove Springs that can plant, and then it's like, oh, we can do this too, you know, so.
So where there's not an elder board yet, are your elders more hands-on with those plants?
You know, I don't think we've played that as well, honestly. So no, because our elder board has struggled with size. We've just struggled to raise up. We've struggled to get yeses from men. We have a lot of qualified elders, and they are just not saying yes because our church is young. I think they're young. So they like, I just have my third kid, bro, and they're like puking up all over me. I don't want to elder. Like we've run into that a lot. So because we get stretched thin on the board, it's then really hard. So I can meet with Josh, but our elders we even have stuff where I'm like, these cats, they're supposed to all visit our church plants at least once while they're on the board, which means that they have to go to at least one per year. They're also supposed to do a mission trip at least once a year. So same thing, mission vision, right? I'm like, these cats be on here and not going to any of these mugs. And I get it. It's hard because this person is asking for healing and we want to pray for them on Sunday. We got to kick this person out of our church. So I get it. Like, it's hard. I just don't think we've captured that one as good yet. So.
All right. Tim, did you have one more?
No.
There you go. Okay. All right. Thank you, Tory.
Thank you.